It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Hulk smash this week on Monster Mondays. We're going to be talking about the 2016 animated flick Hulk, Where Monsters Dwell. Not only does the movie star the Incredible Hulk, who we will be talking about very shortly, but the subtitle is also a reference to some old Marvel stuff as well. But let's start with Marvel's Green Goliath. The Incredible Hulk made his comic book debut in 1962. The Marvel Age of Comics were already in full swing by then. While 1961's Fantastic Four #1 was credited as the beginning of the Marvel Age of Comics, Marvel as a company had been around for a little longer. And that's if you specifically say Marvel and not Timely Comics or Atlas Comics, which were the publishing companies that that Marvel was known as before they took on the name Marvel. But with the debut of the Fantastic Four, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby got on a real hot streak in creating characters to fill out this new superhero shared continuity. Ant-Man debuted right at the end of 1961, beginning of 1962, and then came the Hulk. Now, the creation of the Hulk drew from Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but for the modern age, if you will, Dr. Bruce Banner was a genius. This genius caught the attention of the U.S. Army and General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, and during an experimental detonation of a gamma bomb, Bruce realized that a teenager named Rick Jones had gotten into the blast zone and Banner had to go and save the kid. And when the blast went off, Banner was doused with and absorbed an incredible amount of gamma radiation. Now, he woke up completely unscathed. However, each night, Banner would change into a rampaging beast, which soldiers would ultimately call a Hulk. Now, after a while, a scheming trickster god from Norse mythology, Loki, looked for an instrument that could facilitate the death of his adopted brother Thor. So he manipulated the Hulk into a battle with Thor, Ant-Man, the Wasp, and Iron Man. Little did Loki realize the superhero team would realize what was going on, and they would end up forming the Avengers. Now, that's the early history of the Hulk in a nutshell. Later, the Hulk would not so much transform at night, but based on his anger. As he got angrier, he would get stronger and bigger. However, many don't realize that the Hulk's original series was canceled after only 6 issues. Interestingly enough, also, the original version of the Hulk was not green. He was gray. That ended up changing a little bit later as comic book publishing was able to, they had to change it to green based on the coloring process and all of that. But he would go on to appear in some Fantastic Four issues and several of the early Avengers issues. But he would then share the title Tales to Astonish with Ant-Man beginning in 1964. Ant-Man was created in 1960, right at the beginning of 1962, very end of 1961, like I said. And also, you would have other characters coming along in 62 and 63, like Stan Lee and Steve Ditko would create Spider-Man. They would also create Doctor Strange, who we will see in this movie. But by the end of the 60s, the Hulk himself would get his own series again and would become a fairly major pop culture, pop art icon. Teens and college kids identified many of Marvel's stars, particularly Spider-Man, who debuted, like I said, shortly after the Hulk, and the Hulk himself as major literary characters, characters that they really got into and saw a lot of themselves in, which a lot of those Marvel characters were kind of pulling from real life struggles that actual people who could be reading the comics struggled with. And Marvel was very good at appealing to a wide range of age groups and different people from different backgrounds. But in 1978, the Hulk got a very popular CBS television series starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. I mean, no fooling. That show used to scare me when I was a little kid. I would always get freaked out when Bill Bixby's eyes would start to like glow green as when he was getting ready to become the Incredible Hulk. But by the 2000 superhero boom, Hulk would get a big screen debut with the help of Oscar-winning director Ang Lee, and he'd later get many more movies thanks to the current Marvel Cinematic Universe. As for animation, Hulk has appeared in stuff going all the way back to the mid-60s Marvel superhero series. In the 80s, he had his own series again and appeared in an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Then in the 90s, he got back into a regular animated series of his own, and that led to him appearing in different series in both starring and supporting roles as well. Now, for this movie subtitle, Where Monsters Dwell, that is based on a Marvel horror sci-fi fantasy series that ran from 1970 to 1975. The series wasn't so much an original series as much as it was, they were reprints of issues of Tales of Suspense, Strange Tales, Tales to Astonish, and Journey into Mystery back from the 50s when those series were anthology horror and sci-fi series. It was the return of horror and other oddball storytelling that had previously been squashed by the Comics Code Authority that led to lots of the Marvel horror books and most importantly, The Tomb of Dracula during the early 70s. And so the title Where Monsters Dwell was then revived as a miniseries for the 2015 event Secret Wars. But let's see how Hulk finds where monsters dwell. It's Halloween night on Bleecker Street, and there are some kids who are daring each other to knock on the door of Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum. They don't realize that the good doctor is busy fighting an interdimensional creature, and Strange uses a kid's piece of bubble gum to bind the creature before having to face 3 more monsters, which ultimately scare the trick-or-treaters away. But the spooks are not done for the kids quite yet as they run right into the Incredible Hulk, who helps get the kids to safety before getting in on some smashing of the monsters that Strange is dealing with. However, right before utterly smashing a bug-like creature, Hulk surprisingly falls asleep and reverts back to Bruce Banner. Now, Strange doesn't want the monsters smashed, only contained so that he can free them from whatever curse they've got over them that's turning them into these creatures. Now, soon the Howling Commandos arrive, and these are monster creatures that work for S.H.I.E.L.D. And so you have the zombie of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Jasper Sitwell. You have Man-Thing, who I mentioned recently because R.L. Stine of Goosebumps wrote a miniseries for Man-Thing. You have Nina Price, the Vampire by Night, and Warwolf. He's a werewolf. Just, he's kind of like an army wolf, so he's Warwolf. Get it? Anyway, at first, Hulk and the Howling Commandos don't realize that they're all on the same side, having been summoned by Doctor Strange. Now, once again, Hulk falls asleep and reverts back to Bruce Banner, and Strange is pretty curious why this seems to be happening in very specific scenarios while dealing with monsters. But Strange explains to everyone that on All Hallows Eve, the barriers between the waking and dream worlds thin. And he explains that he worked with a family who was concerned with their child's peculiar sleeping habits. And it turns out that this kid was haunted by the demon Nightmare, the ruler of the dream dimension. Now, Strange failed to save the kid, whose soul is captured by Nightmare and held captive. And Nightmare warns that he is only the first of many more souls that the creature will take. And the kid then transformed into a Minotaur, the creature he feared the most in his nightmares. The monsters Strange has been fighting are the creatures the people Nightmare has been capturing in the dream dimension. The more people captured and transformed by Nightmare, the more able Nightmare is able to gain control in the waking world. So Strange thinks that the dual nature of Banner and the Hulk may be a key to defeating old Nightmare. And that's because when Hulk falls asleep, in these kind of scenarios, he's got to be somewhat being manipulated by Nightmare. And that's what he really is kind of getting at, that he's definitely being tampered by from Nightmare. And Hulk, being a hero and an Avenger, gives Nightmare a chance to actually walk around the real world while he's kind of manipulating the sleeping Hulk, or the sleeping Banner in this case, I suppose, while no one necessarily would fear him. So Strange and Banner enter into Banner's unconsciousness, and there Banner and Hulk are separated and need to figure out a way to work together in order to fight Nightmare, who's trying to trick Hulk into believing Bruce is trying to get rid of his monstrous alter ego. But you see, Hulk really does not like Banner. He always thinks of Banner as puny Banner. He always wants to be the one in control so he can smash everything. Plus, it's pretty hard to keep Hulk asleep, so it's up to the Howling Commandos to keep Hulk contained, which is, well, if it's hard to keep him asleep, it's even more difficult to contain him. But in the dream world, Banner evens the playing field in his battle with his alter ego by showing up to fight the Hulk in Tony Stark's Hulkbuster armor. It's all part of dream manipulation that Strange kind of gives to Banner to be able to kind of take control of the situation here. But in the waking world, the Howling Commanders have to wrangle Nightmare's monsters while Nightmare captures Strange and forcing the Sorcerer to face a nightmare of his own, not being able to save those that he's ultimately been tasked to protect. Now, Hulk seemingly defeats Banner and helps smash the barrier between the dream dimension and the waking world, but it's all the trick to free the captive souls that Nightmare has taken and ultimately return them to the waking world. Now, Benito Serrano, that's the kid that Strange was asked to help when he discovered Nightmare was up to no good. He teaches the kid something that Strange had told him. Basically, if you face your fears and show them that you're not scared of these things in your nightmares, you can ultimately defeat them. Again, it's dream manipulation, right? All but one of the kids is able to overcome their fears. And in the waking world, the 3 of the 4 monsters in the waking world turn back into the teenage kids. Now, Benito helps the last cross back over and defeat her monster to transform her back into her normal self. Now, Banner and Hulk defeat Nightmare, but not before Nightmare merges Benito's soul with his greatest fear from his nightmares, a Minotaur, and that transforms the kid permanently into a monster. Nightmare reveals that his defeat was another trick and that he crossed over into the waking world by way of the Hulk. And so basically, he's now able to get into the real world and start kind of messing with stuff there and gain more power. Minotaur, now able to fight against Nightmare along with the Howling Commandos, Hulk, and Doctor Strange, is there to basically try to stop Nightmare from funneling the dreams of anyone currently asleep into powers of his own, basically twisting himself into a giant horned monster. And after much smashing from the heroes, Doctor Strange manages to banish Nightmare back into his own realm, and the Howling Commandos, Hulk, and Minotaur basically have a conversation around what it means to be this thing that some people might be afraid of, but ultimately proving their worth and proving their good through the actions that they take. So let's talk about 3 things I like about Hulk, Where Monsters Dwell. First, I love that this is a Halloween movie. If Hulk and Doctor Strange are going to fight monsters, it had better be Halloween. The opening scene is particularly charming with the trick-or-treating kids daring each other to knock on the door of the famed house at 177A Bleecker Street, only to be scared away by the monsters Strange is fighting, only then to run into the Hulk, the most famous of all monsters in the Marvel Universe. And it adds a little bit of fun and childhood wonder to the proceedings. And most of the kids think that it's kind of lame that the Hulk just turns into some guy. But the kid who knocked on Strange's door still sees Hulk for what he is, a hero, even if the other kids think that, the guy that he turns into is just a lame-o. It's a nice opening for kiddos and comic fans alike. Second, I like that while this movie belongs to the Hulk, this, like again, the aforementioned Goosebumps is one of those more bang for your buck types of situations. You have the Jolly Green Goliath, Doctor Strange, and all his weirdness. By the way, speaking of Doctor Strange, I love that he has all of these really fancy worded spells that he throws out, the Eye of Agamotto and, the whatever, all of these things that sound like they're really powerful things, but every time he throws something at Nightmare or one of his monsters, it doesn't do anything. So it's a good way of Doctor Strange is an incredibly powerful superhero, but at the same time, he's also got the things that he, the spells that he casts should almost always work, except for in this one situation in which it doesn't. I love stuff like that. That's so very, it's kind of kids cartoon, but it's also very comic booky in the classic sense. But anyway, you have, the Monsters of the subtitle is also here. So that's kind of getting back to that more bang for your buck type of situation. And of course you have the Howling Commandos, which include a vampire, a werewolf, a zombie, and a man-thing. And they're fighting a demon who rides around on a flying horse that also calls to mind the legend of Sleepy Hollow in some ways as well. And on top of all that, you have Benito Serrano, who is also at one point in time in Marvel history was a hero called Toro. And Toro was the name of the original Human Torch's sidekick back in the 40s. So add in a guy who in comics could burst into flames, who then becomes this actual minotaur. So you've got creatures and monsters all over the place. And this would make for a fun Halloween watch for any kid who likes superheroes. Third, I like that the villain of this movie is the demon Nightmare. Nightmare was an old Stan Lee, Steve Ditko creation that goes all the way back to 1963. And while Nightmare showed up occasionally here and there throughout the years, it's not like he's actually an A-list villain like Doctor Doom, the Red Skull, or Thanos. I mean, he's a powerful villain, but it's not exactly easy to find the right story for him to appear in. It's not something that you would build an entire event around, or it's not something that you would build up to. I mean, it would be, he's good for one arc of a story or a single issue for somebody to have to deal with. But it's not exactly the easiest villain to just drop into any old story or any old movie or anything like that. Nightmare's first appearance was Strange Tales number 110, which also happened to be Doctor Strange's first appearance as well. So Nightmare and Strange go all the way back, and the demon was Strange's very first foe. So it's cool that a movie that deals with monsters and Doctor Strange and Halloween, there's finally a chance to give Nightmare a movie of his own. Now, he did show up in a couple of TV shows, but this is some pretty good exposure for the creature, and I like that it's Nightmare creating all this havoc, and not that it's just some monsters that happen to pop up and roam around, like out of the muck or a mad scientist plot. It's actually it's a villain that actually has some stakes to him and what he's doing. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we go from the 2010s all the way back to the 1960s for a month of quite recognizable monsters and one particular sex symbol. And we start by visiting Hammer and the 1967 film Frankenstein Created Woman. Until next week, stay spooky.